I came here a couple of years ago to when the first EU constitution was raised, before the French and the Dutch rejected it and changed the situation. And now we have a new situation, of course, with the Reform Treaty, as it's called, the Treaty of Lisbon, which you all probably know about. And so what we've been focused on in the trade unionists against the EU constitution in Britain is to raise awareness of something that most trade unionists are not aware of, even at this late stage. Britain has quite a sophisticated media, but it's still not getting through compared to other areas, Eastern Europe, where there is no media to speak of that talks about these things. And so we produced a pamphlet which is at the back, and this really outlines how we see the EU Constitution and the Reform Treaty, the renamed treaty we like to call it, because obviously there is enough evidence that it is the same treaty. I mean, I think you'd have to be a victim of a cruel medical experiment not to understand that that's the case. And Brown is still sticking to that argument, and to a ludicrous degree, where people are really not taking it seriously. And it's become a matter of trust amongst the Labour voters to have a referendum. So there's a lot of pressure on Tony Blair, on Gordon Brown, to have this referendum, but it's not being really discussed in Parliament amongst the political elites. And I think that's the key of where we are. A couple of weeks ago, the RMT had a political school in Doncaster, in Yorkshire, and there was a dozen RMT members there, and we laid out what the EU Constitution was. And what was interesting, these reps, who I've never met before, said the RMT analysis and the trade unions against the EU Constitution analysis is a recruitment tool for us. People join RMT and TUAC on the basis of a quite advanced understanding of what the EU Constitution is, because there is no other outlet at the moment, unfortunately, within the Labour movement. And I think the gloves are really off, and what the EU Constitution is, as far as TUAC is concerned, it turns the EU into a state which is legally and politically superior to all the member states, and it allows the free movement of capital, goods, services and labour, and obviously gives the EU the power to privatise public services, creates the single currency will become the official currency of the bloc for all 27 member states will be committed to joining it. A single legal framework with a single foreign policy, and of course the famous passerelle clause where they can amend their treaties or their constitution or their treaties as and when they see fit, without any further recourse to referendums or to member states. And so it's a very serious situation, and for trade unionists it is particularly serious because it's becoming obvious that the rules on the free movement of labour, capital, goods and services will override all trade union rights. This is written into the constitution. I want to come back to that in a little while. And there's obviously the European Court of Justice will be given the rights to decide what rights trade unions have. So essentially for us, it removes national democratic rights from all member states, and it centralises power to the EU institutions and in fact the larger EU states, particularly France and Germany. And now someone mentioned earlier about the idea of opposition to all this is somehow right wing, and there's this whole idea of a foreign conspiracy. And I think we have to understand that this is a cartel of the political elites coming together against the people. And that was clear to me at this political school when these trade union reps, not particularly political, understood that simple fact of the abolition of any meaningful parliaments and member states, because it abolishes the right to self-determination and it creates a super-state dominated primarily by the big business and corporate lobbyists, and takes away power from working people that has been developed by trade unions over centuries. In this country, James Connolly and the trade union movement led to the independence of this country, and I think that many other member states had the same experience in the liberation from fascism and Nazism. Was in general the Labour organised working class across the EU, and all that is under threat. And it's not only the constitution that is obviously pointing in this direction. And the EU directives, the Services Directive, but also the Rail Directives, the Postal Directives, all point to the same thing, and that is turning public services over to private monopolies across the EU. The Rail Directive is particularly advanced in Britain. We've had it for 10 years, and now we're seeing the German takeover of most of British freight rail, and the development of private rail monopolies that are giving appalling services to customers, and in the interest of dragging more and more subsidies out of from the governments, and ultimately all these directives cost the people more because they will be subsidised. The private monopolies will be subsidised by the taxpayer in one form of another. And another important area where the Commission has made clear that national collective bargaining should not exist because it gets in the way of the free movement of capital, services and labour. And in fact the EU Commission has released a green paper called Flexicurity, which gives the idea that somehow if workers embrace flexibility, they will get security. And that is not exactly how people have seen it, even in the right wing of the trade union movement in this country, in my country, in Britain. Even the General Secretary of Amicus, which is not known for its Eurosceptic views in any sense, he said to the Times earlier this year, "The Green Paper hides behind the language of equality to propose measures to force exploitation and insecurity on every worker in Europe." So in other words, it removes the idea of the concept of national bargaining in the interest of having a flexible workforce. And that is understood by increasing numbers of people within the trade union and labour movement. And how our role is trying to highlight that. And in fact, the pamphlet you have in front of you, we produced enough for every delegate of the TUC this year. And we overwhelmingly won the argument at Congress. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I mean, the unions that came out and made such strong statements against this constitution was a surprise to us. And it gives us hope that we can develop democratic alternatives to this steamroller that seems to be upon us. But one way or another, we have to develop these alternatives, and in order to let the people's voice be heard, and it's through the organised trade union and labour movement that will be heard against this cartel of political elites. And I want to leave it there because we need to have a discussion. Thanks a lot.